Good morning on this Sunday, March 14th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. If most state Senate Republicans get their way, you'll need a good reason to vote absentee rather than in person. Also, the vote was unanimous in the Georgia House to overhaul the citizens arrest law. And billions of dollars are coming to Georgia in the new stimulus plan, but the governor says there are lots of strings attached. Bill, Theron, Kathy, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Drama in the state Senate on crossover day this week. Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan refused to preside over the bill that does away with no excuse absentee voting. 4 Republican senators were excused from the no excuse absentee voting bill, which narrowly passed 29 to 20. Theron, I'll start with you this week. I want to get your thoughts on just how this all played out.
Well, now this is probably the 3rd or 4th week, Lori, that we've been talking about this. And so when we first, was talking about this to our viewers, I was saying how I felt like the elimination of Sunday voting and absentee voting was going to disenfranchise voters, particularly voters of color. Then last week I made the sort of claim that Republicans, by doing away with no excuse absentee ballots, that they were going to hurt their own constituencies and they were going to hurt our men and women in the military. And so what you saw is that I think the pressure is mounting against the Republicans in the state Senate and also in the state House, but particularly in the state Senate. And that's why you saw a lot of these moderate Republicans, for whatever reason, excuse themselves. I mean, that's left up to them to explain why they didn't vote or why the lieutenant governor didn't preside over this vote. But I think the pressure is mounting. The corporate community is stepping up more. There are a lot of activists and a lot of groups out there that are actually encouraging constituents who are in these senators' districts to call them and to let them know that they do not want to do away with no excuse absentee voting.
Phil, we were talking before the show because I was out last week and I was like, did I miss something? Because I feel like the no excuse absentee bill kind of came out of the blue and was passed in the Senate. What do you think about this? And the fact that there were state senators who just skipped the vote?
Yes, I, of course, have to take a different approach than Theron. I think the pressure was building to tighten up, especially with regard to the mail-in absentee ballots, where, as we all know, the state was flooded with 1.2 million absentee ballots with weak voter signature verification. So the Republicans especially realized you had to tighten up in various areas, both chambers. So, and then Janelle and I talked about just what a mess in one county, Georgia's most populous county, Fulton, is, where with absentee ballots, lack of chain of custody, lack of poll workers coming in and looking at it. So all of these things had to be tightened up. And I think pressure's building to make it better and to restore confidence. As for Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, I think that that ought to be criticized. That's his job, is to preside over the state Senate. And if you don't like something, and Lori, you and I remember this when we watched when the Democrats ran the state Senate with Zell Miller, Lieutenant Governor Miller. If there were some problems within his Democrat caucus, he would leave the presiding chair, he would go down to the well, and he would explain himself. So why didn't Duncan just go down and explain his case? If he didn't like a provision in the bill, say so. Don't just leave the chamber.
But, tightening the restrictions, I think that's one thing, but doing away with the no excuse absentee voting, I think, is a whole different ballgame. Janelle, this bill isn't likely to go much further, I don't think, because we've heard reservations from the speaker and the governor. But what do you think about Democrats' claims that this just proves Republicans are trying to make it harder for people to vote?
Like I said, we have talked about this, and I feel like we are beating a dead horse when we continue to have to justify how, fighting for election integrity doesn't mean racism. But, I have a favorite economist, and one of the things that he said, Thomas Sowell, is that he said that racism is not dead, but it's on life support, kept alive by politicians, race hustlers, and people who have a sense of superiority by denouncing others as racist. And I feel like that's what's happening. I really believe deep down in my heart that, racism is only alive because we keep talking about it. We won't let it die. And the fact of the matter is, being able to have these conversations, I've talked to so many people, so many legislators who do not look like me. And the one common denominator is that this is not about race. This is not about disenfranchising anyone. This is about making sure there's election integrity for everyone. And I think showing that the unanimous vote around the citizens arrest law shows that people can unite and that we are on the same page when it comes to things that really do affect people of color. So when you make it seem like every decision that comes out of the Republican side is rooted in some form of racism, you are now disenfranchising voters like me. You're disenfranchising voters that are of the Asian community, the Indian community, and every other minority community that doesn't look like, the white Republicans. So I think that that's something that we need to talk about. I think we need to step away from that point and really focus in on what is the heart of the issue, which is election integrity.
And Kathy, Theron kind of alluded to this. Stacey Abrams called on the business community to speak out on these voting bills, much like they did on religious freedom. But we're not really hearing much from the major companies. Why do you think that is on this issue?
Well, I think the main reason is it's hard when you have 80 election bills to decide which ones you're going to focus on and how you want to talk about it. Now that we're down to sort of a baker's dozen of them, it's becoming a little bit easier for folks to focus, and I think you are going to see the business community step up and weigh in. We're already seeing that. The Metro Chamber has made some pretty defining statements about what they're looking at, and the key thing is, if you're talking about voter integrity, eliminating no excuse absentee ballot voting does nothing to address that issue. All it does is make it harder for people who need to vote absentee that don't fall into certain age and disability categories or military service to have the ability to do it. And we're just far past the point where people are going to tolerate those kinds of inconveniences. So I think we're going to see that go away, and then we're going to start focusing on some more details, like these really fundamental changes to how elections get administered by changing who's in control of elections at the local level and in the Secretary of State's office. And then we're going to be talking about photo IDs. What are people going to do who need to put to use some ID besides their driver's license number or social security number, and what are the security requirements that are going to happen with this information as more and more people consistently vote absentee, because I think the high watermark that we've hit will remain in future elections.
All right, well, as Janelle says, I don't want to beat a dead horse, so we will move on, because there was another really important issue, and there was a historic vote in the Georgia House. Every House member present voted to overhaul the citizens arrest law after the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Theron, I want to get your take, because really this sent quite a message, and it was an emotional moment in the House.
Well, what's interesting, Lori, is that, as you saw, is that we have had a lot of controversial bills and a lot of controversial comments where people go to the well, and that's when they speak out and sort of in support or against a bill. But to have every single member of the State House vote to really put forth this common sense solution to overhaul the citizens arrest bill in Georgia was pretty monumental. And and again, it took an unarmed African-American man, Ahmaud Arbery, to get shot in Brunswick, Georgia, for us to finally realize that this law that had been in place for many, many years needed to be overhauled. And so this is a bright spot that I know we all want to highlight on this show, where you see Republicans and Democrats come together to do what's right for this state. Absolutely,
because we don't always see that. Thanks, everybody. We're going to move on. Up next, former President Trump weighs in on Georgia's 2022 Senate race, urging Herschel Walker to challenge Senator Raphael Warnock. We'll talk about that after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Run, Herschel, run. The message from former President Trump to UGA football legend Herschel Walker, who is a huge supporter of Donald Trump's. Phil, Insider Advantage out with a new poll this week about Herschel Walker's chances in a U.S. Senate race.
That's right. My colleague, Matt Towery, who's polled for years, has teamed up with Robert Cahaley, another prominent Georgia pollster, and they came out with a poll of GOP voters for the 2022 primary and general election. And guess what? Herschel Walker tops the Democrat incumbent, Raphael Warnock, 47 to 45% in terms of a general election. And in the primary, interestingly enough, Doug Collins, the former congressman, you have to get the GOP nomination, so Collins was about neck and neck with Herschel Walker. And as I mentioned on the other broadcast previously, the president is courting Herschel Walker very heavily. There's another takeaway from this Insider Advantage poll, too, if you want to click on insideradvantage.com to see it, and that is that Governor Kemp's disapproval rating is at very, very low, and his approval rating, I got that switched around. His approval rating is very low and disapproval rating is high, over 50%. He's got a lot of work to do.
Theron, hard to believe that we're already talking about another Senate race, but it is just around the corner. What do Democrats think about a Herschel Walker run? I know you're a big UGA fan.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of Herschel Walker, the football player, but the Herschel Walker, the politician, I've disagreed with because I think that a lot of his policy positions are not those that I agree with. But I think we got to answer ourselves a few questions here, Lori. Number one, does Herschel Walker even live in the state of Georgia? I mean, last time I checked, he may still have a residence here, but I think he spends a lot of his time out of state. I mean, this guy's never run for office. His name comes up consistently. And just because the former president is supporting him, it just shows you how Republicans are getting in line. But listen, I will take Senator Raphael Warnock any day over Herschel Walker. So bring it on. I think this poll that Phil has done is heavily skewed towards Republicans, but ultimately Herschel Walker will not beat Raphael Warnock. You can actually take that to the bank.
Janelle, do you think Herschel Walker is likely to get in, or are Republicans just kind of having some fun with this?
I don't know. I keep hearing both sides, so I'm kind of with everyone else waiting to see. But I will say that this does send a message that the Republican Party is not only just open to a new message, but they're also open to new messengers. And I think that's something that the Democratic Party needs to pay attention to. But I guess we'll see. I'm kind of in the loop with everyone else, to see what he's going to do or if he's going to jump in or not.
All right, we'll be waiting to see. Kathy, this week in the AJC, Bill Torpey had an interesting read about the possibility of former Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed stepping back into the political arena, possibly a run for his old job. Do you think there's anything to this?
Oh, that's the political intrigue question of the week. Everybody's, chatting about it. I'm not hearing anybody yet embracing that with any enthusiasm. Those of us who've been in public office before love to see our names in polls. So maybe, he just wanted to see his name in the lights again. But I think it's a little too soon to tell. But I'm not sure there'd be a lot of excitement here in Atlanta to see him back in office.
Phil, we talk a lot about Atlanta city politics here. And to be fair, although several members of Reed's administration were charged in a federal corruption probe, he was not. The mayor was extremely tough on crime. He had the police force up to 2,000 strong, and crime is a really big issue and now in the minds of many voters. But in your mind, is this idea just far-fetched?
Well, I agree with Kathy. I think that some people just threw his name out, and I don't see it as being anything serious. And let's remember the former U.S. Attorney B.J. Pack, who did a great job in peeling away the layers of corruption in City Hall under Reed. He said very flatly and succinctly that the culture of corruption started at the top in the Kasim Reed administration. I don't think that people of both sides of the aisle don't want to have another culture of corruption. In fact, we're having enough trouble with current Mayor Bottoms, where it kind of continued into her first term.
Theron, we know Mayor Bottoms is interested in another run, and Felicia Moore is challenging her. When do you see, this race kind of heating up and us really getting into the issues?
Well, I think you're going to see probably by the end of this month when the disclosures are sort of going to be due kind of in April. I think April you'll kind of see where the money race is on this, but I think that Mayor Bottoms is going to have a good bit of money in her war chest, and I think ultimately she's going to be able to highlight a lot of things that she's doing right now, particularly around getting a vaccine getting a vaccine site here in Atlanta, Also, I'm sure she's going to be with the president, the vice president when they come to Georgia next week. And also, I think she'll be able to talk about how she's going to have a lot of money to spend to make sure that people in Atlanta are direct recipients of this money that our 2 U.S. senators and our congressional delegations were able to fight for with this new stimulus package. So I think ultimately you'll also hear very soon from her about tackling, which I believe, Lori, you've heard me say this, is the number one issue, and that is making sure that people feel safe in the city of Atlanta. People want to be in safe neighborhoods, make sure they can actually shop, take their kids to school safely, and I think that is the number one issue that anybody who's running for mayor has got to be able to come with a clear solution on the future and how we're going to deal with this issue of crime.
Janelle, final word on the upcoming mayor's race.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that we're even starting to talk about it. This is the races this year, so I think this is something we definitely need to talk about. I'm interested to see what the agenda items are going to be coming from Felicia Moore as well as from Mayor Bottoms. We kind of get an idea of Mayor Bottoms, but I really am interested in seeing where Felicia Moore is going to come. But I'm just glad that we're talking about it. I want to talk about it more.
Oh, we will. All right. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, Georgia is expected to receive almost $5 billion with the new economic stimulus plan just passed. But Governor Brian Kemp and other Republicans say there are way too many strings attached.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Biden and Vice President Harris are expected in Atlanta Friday to praise the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. But Governor Kemp and other Republicans are taking issue with the provision that blocks them from using these funds for tax breaks. Kathy, Democrats say they want that money used for Medicaid expansion.
Yep, absolutely. The governor's got these awful polling numbers, and I think you ought to be thinking about them. What he's saying isn't resonating with people. We're going to see, I think, close to $5 billion flowing into the state. We've got hospitals closing all over the place. We got people in need of insurance. Medicaid expansion would create a lot of jobs in rural areas in particular. It is a great strategic way to spend this money, and I think they really need to take a look at it and just quit the politics and start helping people, because right now what this is intended to do is to put money out there in ways that can significantly help people weather this storm. And we're coming out of it, but people aren't going to come out of it economically. And I just hope that the governor will really look hard at Medicaid expansion, because it is a very smart thing to do.
Janelle, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that the president and the vice president takes questions when they come to Georgia, because especially from people on behalf of the taxpayers, since it's 1.9 trillion taxpayer dollars that's being spent here. But I will say that when it comes to the tax cuts, I understand the logic, but I feel like we're back into these old debate between whether we should teach someone to fish or hand them a fish. And I think that at the end of the day, when it comes to the tax breaks, tax cuts help everyone. I mean, it helps the individual to keep more money in their pocket, and then it helps businesses to be able to hire more people and then hire those people that's keeping money in their pocket, so that now we can lead towards a generational wealth outcome. And I think that is the overall objective of it. Now, I mean, I'm not against helping people in need that are in need right now, because no one was prepared for a pandemic, but I do think there needs to be a balance on how the money is distributed to make sure that we're not creating temporary solutions that's going to ultimately become a problem later.
I want to move on because, Phil, one of the measures that we haven't really discussed, maybe y'all got to this last week, but the state Senate passed the constitutional sports betting constitutional amendment. And the question is, can it get through the House, and will casinos be added to it?
I think that there is an appetite to legalize the sports betting. After all, I read a statistic where the last Super Bowl, 98% of the people who were doing sports betting were doing it illegally. Well, that's got to be fixed, and other states are fixing it, and so should Georgia. The question, as you're pointing out, is should it be a constitutional amendment where 2/3 of each chamber have to agree to that, and then, of course, it would have to be voted on in a referendum by the people. I think that that will pass in both chambers. numbers. I don't know. I think casino resort gambling is dead for this year, and there may be an attempt to revive the pari-mutuel local horse wagering, especially as Theron and I well know, the legislature ends March 31st, and anything can still happen. So maybe look for the horse racing to be added to, or separated or die from the sports betting.
Interesting. Theron, you're so well connected down there at the Capitol. What are you hearing?
It's interesting, Lori. I'm hearing that, sports betting is still alive, but we got to remember, and I mentioned this last week on the show, that I think the Democrats, the minority party, particularly in the House, they're locking down. They want to know where these sports teams stand on these voter restriction bills. And so I think that there's got to be a lot of work done with the Democratic caucus to make sure that they're on board. As far as destination resort casino, I actually think, Lori, it may actually have a better chance than we think. What I'm hearing is that they've been quiet. There's been a lot of talks back and forth about trying to get a constitutional amendment to, quite frankly, disallow the people of Georgia to vote on whether or not they want destination resort casino gambling in this state. And so what I worry about, though, if you attach the two of them, then the people who may be for sports betting but against casinos may not get their vote, and vice versa. And so I think I would wait and see if you keep the two bills separate. But if you attach them together, you get sort of enemies and pros and cons on both sides. And so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Kathy, you've been critical that legislators are even focused on this issue this session because of the pandemic. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not an issue that, I wake up every morning thinking about, wishing we had happening here in the state. But, I think something's going to come out. I think the bottom line is probably sports betting, because that seems to have the clearest path and sort of the least amount of lift. So if I were to bet, I'd bet on that. I'm not sure that the other two things are quite ripe yet. And casinos have a whole different kind of impact, particularly on sort of local arts and culture organizations. And I think a lot of folks are reluctant to disrupt that in their local communities. So I think it's just got a harder lift.
All right, we'll see where it goes. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
I'll start out, and usually I don't have losers because, I hate to be mean, but I think we need to call out the senators who did not post a vote on the no excuse absentee voting. And they are Senators John Albers, Kay Kirkpatrick, Brian Strickland, and Senator Chuck Hufstetler. And I think the reason is because voters elect you to make a vote. And I know that they were talking about they wanted this bill to move on, but take a vote on it and be on the record with it. So those are my losers for the week. Phil, over to you.
Well, I agree with you, Lori. I think that's their job, and explain why they're voting. But I've got a winner, and that is David Namias. He was just elevated to be Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court. I always enjoy his reading his opinions. He's got quite a flair for writing. And I've got another winner, and that's the Georgia National Guard. It made me sad to see these young soldiers trying to stay awake on sentry duty up in Washington, D.C., or the Capitol, where there's no mission, there's no credible security threat. The governor should have pulled them out weeks ago, but they're coming home, and I think that's good. And I've got a winner over in Marietta. A pillar of the business community was David Reardon. He was the longtime owner of Schillings until he sold that last year, and he passed away, and he's a winner.
All right, great. We've got some time. Theron, over to you.
All right, I want to wish Ambassador Andrew Young a happy 89th birthday. So I know he watches the show, so happy birthday, Ambassador Young. He's a hero and a friend of mine. Also want to make President Biden and Vice President Harris a winner. $1.9 trillion. The state of Georgia is going to get roughly about $5 billion. We're going to get $1,400 stimulus checks, as young people say, those stimmies, coming in, $8.1 billion for local government. And then lastly, I want to give a big shout out to the NBA All-Star Weekend. They came here to Atlanta and really did a phenomenal job of paying a lot of attention and giving a tribute to historically black colleges and universities. So definitely want to make the NBA a winner this week as well.
All right, Kathy, we have got about 2 minutes. Over to you.
Great. First, I just want to give a shout out to Tanya Austin. She's a retired Atlanta Police Department officer. I ran into her the other day, and she told me that she and her cousin Deborah have been longtime Georgia Gang fans. They love watching, and apparently no one in their household is allowed to speak on Sunday mornings while they're watching. So y'all, thanks for being there. In the realm of advice he didn't ask for, Governor Kemp, for goodness sake, ask for help. Our performance on vaccine distribution is just beyond the pale. We're at the bottom of the tank, as we've been with other measures in public health. Use this stimulus money to make a commitment to rebuilding our public health infrastructure, which you destroyed your first year in office. Expand Medicaid, get rural hospitals funded, fund those teacher raises, live up to your promises, and maybe you can see those numbers eking up again. So he's my big loser for the week.
All right, Janelle, over to you. We've got about a minute. It's been a tough show for Governor Kemp.
Well, so my winner is to all the volunteers, grassroots organizers, and many of which are my friends who were at the Capitol this past week, and the representatives that voted yes to election voter reform. And then my loser, I really hate to do this, but I hate the cancel culture. So I have to make the New Georgia Project my loser. We received a text message where they were kind of rallying people to try to cancel the businesses that won't do what they want them to do. And I just think that the whole cancel culture method is a losing method. So I have to make them my loser this week.
All right, everybody. Thank you all so much. Thanks for weighing in, and thank you for watching us. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.